Do you have any tips on foreshadowing well, on foreshadowing enough?
First tip is I've found that you can be more heavy-handed than you think. Most of us, and first try-through, are actually too subtle. I learned these things. By the way, Travis, thank you. I learned these things by giving my pieces to my writing group, people I trust, seeing what they pick up on and what they guess and what they don't. And it's a process of trial and error. How do they respond? What do they figure out? And overall, I found that I need more than my first instincts say that I need. That may not be true for every one of you, but for me, it's proven true. The other thing is to be aware that all readers are going to be in a different place regarding foreshadowing, meaning some like to rip apart a text and think very analytically, and they are very, very hard to fool. And that's just a fact of life. Others willingly suspend their disbelief and want to believe like the characters do so that their mind doesn't spoil the ending for them as they go. And there's everyone in between. And so you can't fool all the people all the time, so it goes. You're looking to have a satisfying experience for the readers. And so I generally put in a wide range of different things to be discovered. Some things that are fairly simple, some things that are layered several deep, and that helps with the foreshadowing in that the very deep ones, oftentimes the really analytical people will actually stop looking because they think they've figured it out. And they have figured out some things, and that's good. But then there'll still be a few things to surprise them. But if everything is so 17 layers deep, then those who don't want to spend time figuring things out are going to feel like your story is just one surprise after another, and that can get grueling. That can actually be a bad thing. So I try to layer them and put a variety of different things to be discovered.
How do you maintain a good working relationship with your editor and agent and vice versa?
The way to maintain a good working relationship with your editor is to have an agent whose job it is to be the bad guy or girl in a lot of those situations. They're professionals. They know how to maintain a good relationship. It's not something you have to worry about terribly much. But an agent, one of the reasons to have an agent is so that they can go play hardball when you need hardball played, and it doesn't then force you to do it. So that's one good aspect of it. Keeping a good relationship with your agent, there shouldn't be, that shouldn't be a major concern for you, because in a good agent-author relationship, you are their client. That's like saying, how do I keep a good relationship with my attorney? Well, their job is to, they don't work for you. They do, but it's not the I hire you, it's the I'm your client sort of relationship. And, agents, all the ones I've met are very professional at doing that. If you have an agent who isn't, then they're probably not a great agent. And that's something to look askance at. They're very good at maintaining a professional relationship. One thing to keep in mind, as I said before, is that you should look to be in the driver's seat. Take advice from your agent, but don't just do everything your agent says. And it should be presented to you as advice. This is what I would do, with you having the final say. Because you are in charge of your properties. You're in charge of your stories, and they are, like an attorney, someone who works and stays on retainer in order to give you advice in the field. Yeah?
Kind of on a similar vein as that, with a particular emphasis in pen names.
Okay.
Before you have an agent, I'm almost viewing them as like a lawyer in a sense, because they know the contracts.
Yeah.
Before you're published, before you have an agent, do you need to go to a lawyer to get an official pen name, or is that just something that when you submit something, then you can just make up a pen name right there and then?
9 times out of 10, you should not use a pen name. It is something that newer writers think about a lot. That all the professionals I've talked to say there are very few good reasons. Okay, There are lots of okay reasons, but there are very few good reasons to use a pen name. And the conventional wisdom is don't stress it, and you probably don't want to use one. The good reasons to use a pen name, did we talk about this? If your name is the same as a famous person's name, you want a pen name. If your name is something embarrassing, you want a pen name. Otherwise, you usually don't. And so if you really want to use one, it's not a big deal, but you don't trademark a pen name usually. I mean, you can trademark your name if you really feel like it, but you need to be publishing on a very large scale level that you would be worried that people would be using your name to endorse products in order to generate sales. And until you hit a certain level of fame, your name is not going to be worth anything, and it would be detrimental for someone to try and use your name to endorse their product because everyone's going to say, who? And so I would not worry about that at all. I mean, you submit to the agent under your own name, submit to editors under your own name. When and if you sell something, if you really want a pen name, go for it. And once you hit, if you're hitting #1 consistently on the bestseller list, then think about trademarking. I don't have my name trademarked. We are trademarking Mistborn, but not my name. There's really no reason to. J.K. Rowling does have her name trademarked, so that her name can't be used to endorse products. You know, it shouldn't be anyway, because there is common law trademark sort of ideas. But just for her, it's better to have that trademark protection. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna start this with an example because I don't know how to phrase it.
Okay.
But like for example, in Mistborn, I feel like a lot of your key players, or most of them, had abilities. But then I never had the sense, like the confusion that not everyone had abilities. I feel like in mine, I feel like sometimes people will be confused about really how prevalent it is.
How
do that
prevalent?
when all the main characters.
Right.
It's like
No, that.
almost no one except all these people.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you do that?
Yeah. No, that's actually a fairly legitimate question that runs up often. How rare can it be when everybody you meet is doing it? In Mistborn, I did it by making sure that there was one high-level profile member of the crew who didn't have any of the powers. That was one. I did that intentionally so that we would say, look, not everybody has these, but it really is a trick. I mean, you don't go, you can watch a movie like X-Men and say, yeah, most everybody's normal, but the X-Men all have powers and we're fine with it. How do you convey that? World building, I would guess. Early on, I have, in Mistborn, I did it with a scene where Kelsier is first introducing Vin to the magic, and he explains how rare it is. I'm using a Watson character in that case. A Watson character is one who is not familiar with what's going on and that can therefore have it explained to them. And you'll find this very commonly used as a literary device. That's what I do there. This is how rare it is. You're even more rare than that. There aren't very many of these around. Reader, take that for accepted, even though everybody you're going to meet is one of these. And you just got to get your readers to suspend their disbelief on that. That's a pretty legit problem so that you've noticed. It happens, and it's kind of tough to figure out. But I do think it's something you can fix in tweaking.
Okay.
So, all right, back there.
Well, that and in Mistborn, you had like a reason why everyone had those powers, because he was kind of gathering a group
Yeah.
of people. So I think as long as you have like a reason why everyone.
Right. Same with X-Men. Xavier is gathering these gifted youngsters. Is that what it's called? And putting them together. So yeah. All right. Right here.
I feel like we could use a whole lecture on the revision process.
Did I not talk to you guys about revision?
You talk about how you don't like it.
I talked about how I don't like it. Let's do a few things on revision then. This is a tough one because revision seems to be even more individual to the various writers than other things in writing, and other things in writing are still pretty individual. And I've also mentioned that I really became a good writer when I learned how to revise with my process. And it felt like this was not something I could learn well until I'd written a number of books. So I had a sense for what had worked in some books and what hadn't worked in other books. So then when I had a sense that something wasn't working, I could try to figure out how to push it toward what was working. So a lot of this came by instinct and experience. And now after the fact, I'm trying to figure out how to explain what I learned to do. The problem is everyone is so different. Particularly on that initial spectrum we talked about in class, multi-drafters and one-drafters or discovery writers and architects, they both seem to approach it very differently. My process is this. I write the book straight through without revising. I change things mid-stride if they need to be changed. I add characters knowing I'll need to go back in and add foreshadowing or add that character into early chapters. I will cut characters. You can see me doing this if you're really interested in Warbreaker, which I posted drafts. I posted chapters as I wrote them. And you can see me just dropping characters out and saying, this character's not in the book anymore. And you can see me adding in themes and whatnot. And you can see me get to the ending of Warbreaker and say, wow, this ending that I was planning is like 80% there, but the 20% miss is actually a pretty glaring miss. I need to do some revising to foreshadow something new to bring in as an element to the end. You see that happening as I go. So I'm taking notes as I write in a separate document of things I've changed. In chapter so-and-so, I added this character. In chapter so-and-so, I tweaked this character's personality in these ways, and I felt it worked. Notes to myself. I'm going to have to really want to look at chapter 7. I felt that, that day when I was writing, I wasn't feeling that it was just awesome. And so in the revision, I should look at that again and see if I was just having an off day or if it really is awful or things like that. I'll do all of this stuff, keeping notes to myself. Often, really, I'll put in 3 stars and stick it at the top of the chapter after I finish it. And then I can collect those afterward. So I finished that completely through. I don't stop writing that first draft. It's very important for me, I've found. There are times when I've stopped because another project has come my way or something like that. And for me, getting back into it is usually disastrous. It takes lots of time and work, and the first things I do if I've been away from something for too long are just terrible. And one of the #1 killers of projects for me is too big a gap between in the middle of a book. And I've learned that about myself. That is because I think of the way that I approach things. If I don't know where the characters are, if I'm not really into who they are and what they're doing, I'm not going to be able to keep pushing forward even though I have an outline, because the feel will be off for me. And so usually if I stop a book, I have to go start from beginning and read through it and do a heavy draft, which I normally don't like to do, and then pick it up. So I don't stop. That is 1.0. 1.0 is straight through. Now, 2.0 is I go back to the beginning of the book just after I finish it. While everything's still fresh, where the characters ended up is still very clear to me. And I start on page 1 and I read through it, fixing all those things that I've taken notes for myself to fix. All the major continuity problems and things like this that I noticed as I was writing it. So this is basically continuity. Everything I knew that needed to be done. 3.0 for me is my first polish. And I do this generally at that point. I will have the 2.0 and I will sit it aside and let it sit for a little while. This isn't a huge gap always. This may just be a couple of weeks. It may be a couple of months. Sometimes it's much longer than that. This can be a big gap for me. It doesn't matter if it's a very long one. I'll be okay on the 2.0 but to 3.0. When I sit down to do 3.0, my goal is cut 15% line by line. Just looking for too many to-be verbs, passive voice, repetition. What I've told you we do, where a lot of us writers will explain something and then show it right after. or will in someone's head talk about something and then in dialogue convey the same thing. We do this a lot. It's very natural as a writer. I cut that stuff out. I try to trim. I look for excess world building that I've just been trying to figure out for myself, or excess character where I've been writing my way into a character, and I shrink, condense, clean up. I also look to make, more powerful descriptions. Again, usually by cutting and looking for more concrete language and things like this. All of the stuff that they talk about in your most of your English classes, your other writing classes where they talk about prose, this is when I do it, is the 3.0 draft. 3.0 draft is then usually where I will send it, so little gap, and then here it goes to alphas. And that's usually a fairly large gap, depending on the book, if I can get it. I don't get this all the time lately because of how tight deadlines are. But in a perfect world, this goes to alpha readers. That is, for me, alphas are agent, editor, writing group, wife. And so I'll start workshopping it in my writing group chapter by chapter. I'll have my agent, my editor read it, and I'll get all these comments back. 6 months is what I'm really looking for, the 6-month gap or so. A lot of people talk, when they talk about revision, talk about how important it is to get some distance from the project. And I find that for almost all of us, this is very, very true. Distance from the project between an early draft and your next draft is going to be wonderful for you in most cases, because what it'll do is you've gotten the book out of your system. It'll let you be a little less paternal or maternal toward this project. You will be able to come back to it and be able to see it more as somebody, you'll never be able to escape your own biases, but more as somebody who's approaching a book fresh without as many of your preconceptions. You'll be able to kill your darlings, in other words. Kill your darlings mean the scenes and chapters that you love so much that you think you're beautiful, but which are not actually contributing to the story and maybe taking away from the story. You'll have a much easier time doing this if you've had a break. I usually, to new writers, suggest, and this is what I did, is write a new book. If you're looking to do this professionally, 2 books a year is a good goal for you. Therefore, you can do a 6-month break. Really, you're not going to be getting 2 books a year, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be spending, even if you write quickly like I did, you'll be spending 6 to 8 months writing a book. And then you'll still have to be spending another 3 months or 4 months total revision time on that same book. So really, you're producing a book in a year. But what you do is you take off that 6 months or 8 months to write a quick first draft on the next one. And then you can come back to this one and do your draft. And you can do a 4.0. This is if you're using my style, by the way. You don't have to. 4.0 is incorporating other people's, incorporating alphas. I don't incorporate everything. As I've said, I take 1 in 3 comments usually. But that 6 months really allows me to dig into high-level stuff again in ways I couldn't. Like sometimes in the 3.0 polish, I'll be making notes to myself. And all during these 6 months, I'll be making notes to myself of sometimes fundamental changes that need to be made. In the Mistborn series, in Mistborn 2, this was some of the stuff I talked in the annotations where I had to actually move where the climactic last scene happened. From up in the mountains back to the city in Luthadel. And this required an extensive rewrite of 10, 12 chapters. In Way of Kings, this was adding in Adolin, Dalinar's son, as a viewpoint character to split off half of what had been Dalinar's character. In this book, I had a character, I've told you guys this before, right? I had a character who is seeing these visions, and in the original draft, he really worried that he was mad. And because of this kind of internal turmoil, am I going crazy, and things like this, he actually came off very wishy-washy as a character. Particularly for a first book, introducing someone I wanted to be presented as a very strong character. His his psychosis and my mad was very hindering, and I didn't know what to do with that until I decided to split it off and give that conflict to his son, which kept saying, my dad's mad. My father that I love is going crazy, where I could have Dalinar say, no, something important is happening. This is, I've got to see this through. I don't know what's happening to me, but I have to trust it. And therefore, you end up with two stronger characters. A son who cares deeply for his father, is conflicted by what's happening with his father, but is still very strong in his opinion that my dad's going crazy. And you have his dad who's saying, no, this is important, these visions, whatever is happening is something I need to see through. We have conflict between the two of them. We have characters who really like each other, but who are butting heads a lot, and they're both stronger characters because of it. This is not a change I could have made without the time off and seeing the perspective of the writing group members and getting their read where they were saying these things about Dalinar that I'd worried that readers would say. Sometimes you worry about things that don't actually turn out to be a legitimate worry, and sometimes they're just really legit worries, and this one was. And so that was an important thing. 4.0 is usually the hardest revision for me. This is the tough one. This is where I am in Memory of Light right now. This is where fundamental changes to a book often need to be made, and it's actually harder for me to do a 4.0 than to write a new 1.0. And this is what stopped me for years in my writing process, was not being able to do this one. And it's not just the alpha reader things, it's knowing which fundamental things are broken and how to fix fundamental things that was difficult for me to figure out. It's almost always character related for me, because I explore my characters, and you end up with something like Dalinar, which I talked about, or Sazed in Book 3 of Mistborn, where the characters, something's going wrong with them and I'm not sure how to fix it. So 4.0 is that one. Then I will usually do another polish. And where I'm basically doing this, but my focus is less on cutting now, because I've got it cut down. I'll still do a little bit, but my focus on the second polish is just really cleaning up the language and the dialogue and the viewpoints, making sure the viewpoints are strong, that we always know whose viewpoint we're in and things like this. And then I give it to betas. And these are my reader response things. These are my some of the very close fans and fandom that I trust, or friends that aren't in my writing group and things like this. I give it to betas. I get their feedback. At this point, this one is a shorter thing, but then I'll do a 6.0, which is often, I've sent this one back to my editor, and my editor's gotten me back another full set of comments. I will do a 6.0 then, where I incorporate my editor's response to my comments, beta reader comments, any last things I think I need to fix. And then at that point, most of the revision is done. Um, 7.0 and 8.0 are the copy edit and the proofreads, which are done in conjunction with my publisher. And so those are both polishes. Yes? 3.0, agent and editor. For those of us who are trying to write a first novel, where yes. Would you suggest it depends on how, let's adapt some of this to you. It really depends on your process and things like this. And I'll go over some other ways I've seen people revise. This stage right here, if you're wanting to follow my format, it depends. Does writing group work for you? That's one question I'd ask myself. Workshopping doesn't work for everyone. It works great for me, but if it doesn't work for you, you then are not going to be giving it to your writing group. But you are going to need some sort of group of alpha readers who are good enough to give you their descriptive responses without going into oh, you should make your book like this. And those are important people to find. Usually I want my alpha readers to be writers themselves and my beta readers not to be. Because writers I found usually, as long as they can keep them, not cross that line between you should do it the way I want you to, they are much better at identifying things such as, this character feels very static. Whereas beta readers' response to that will be, I'm bored here. and they're like, I'm bored, I think there should be more action. Where they're really wrong. What really is happening is a character is static, and there's not a sense of motion in that character. But the beta reader's answer will be, I think you should cut this, or I think there should be more action, or they'll try to fix it, but they don't know how to fix it. And they'll usually try to fix it in wrong ways. Good alphas won't do that. Good alphas will be able to judge. And so writing group can be helpful. Other writer friends can be helpful. Doing a trade. You want to get a variety of these, though, because you don't want to just give it to one person and then hear what every person has to say. If you can give it to 4 people and one person says something and the other 3 don't, that tells you something. Like, okay, that's one person's quirk. Every one of us has quirks. There are things we will not like about a book that the majority of people who read it won't notice, won't care about, or will like. And so if you also have 3 or 4 alphas, you can say to them, hey, after you go through and you're collecting all the comments, did any of the rest of you feel like this? Or stuff like that, which is why I like having a writing group.
So do you physically meet with them?
Yes. I can't correspondence for a writing group. I correspond for like my editor and agent. But I also feel for me it's good to have a variety between workshop and agent editor, because the agent editor will read the book all the way through, which gives a different perspective. Writing groups are notoriously bad at picking out pacing issues. They will think things are paced way too slowly when they're not, is usually the problem. Because if you're reading a book 1 chapter a week, it's going to feel like a glacial pace to you. And you'll try to compensate, but you'll do a bad job of it. Whereas someone who reads the whole thing through will have a much better sense of pacing, but they'll forget the little continuity problems chapter by chapter that a writing group will tell you. And a writing group will also show you where characters start to veer off. You can go back to look at what the early comments are, and you'll see where they like them, where they don't like the character, and things like that. It can give you just a better overall way of pinpointing problems. But writing groups do have problems with some things like pacing. Another thing of writing groups, I think I told you this early on, is if one person in a writing group notices something, it can become a seed that makes everyone in the writing group notice that same thing and harp on it over and over again, when really it's not an important issue. And so you have to be aware of that if one person says, wow, you describe everything as being orange, why do you do that? Then from then on, every writing group, they can be like, more orange! And until you feel like you are just, your book is terrible because everything is orange, when really no one would notice this. It's just normal, but the writing group, someone highlighting it, makes them all notice it. That happens a lot in writing groups.
I know everybody's different at the time they spend editing, but
right.
From your perspective, how much percentage-wise, especially from us trying to get a product from beginning to ready to submit, what kind of proportions do you have for writing the book and editing?
Writing the book definitely takes the most time. I would say for me, all revisions are about totally half the length of the original writing time. So I would anticipate spending about 6 months on a book that took me a year. It may go a little bit longer. That's not counting proofreading, copy edit. For me, proofreading, copy edit, you're not going to have to worry about proofreading, copy edit until you sell the book. For me, my assistant handles the proofreading, copy edit, so I don't have to worry too much about those stages. So yeah, that's what I would say, about 6 months, about half, 1 month for every 2. That's going to be different depending. And we should talk about the fact that this is a process used by someone who does do a lot of outlining and drafting, or a lot of outlining and architecture stuff, plotting and things like this. And my process to doing a 4.0 draft is I will take all these notes and I will look through them all and I will actually organize them by importance. I'll put the most important, widespread, sweeping things, fix Dalinar's character at the top. I'll put medium level things such as mention this thing 3 times in appropriate places to foreshadow this event at the end. That's a medium level thing. I need to do it, a few times. I need to be able to watch out for it, but it's not like, across the entire book, fundamental changes. And at the end, it'll be chapter stuff. And the chapter stuff, I'll just put in the chapter heading. I'll move all the fundamental stuff over to this document, and then I'll have a chapter by chapter with my writing group of things I actually think should be done. and I'll add anything my editor mentions in just a given chapter to that. So then when I sit down to revise, I will go to the chapter, I will open up the document of fundamental changes next to on the same screen as the one I'm working on, and I'll be watching for places where this fundamental changes need to be made, or the medium level changes where I can make some tweaks for them, and I will read through the chapter. I will then actually go to the document of chapter by chapter little problems, look through all of them again, toss out ones I don't agree with now that I've read the chapter again, and these should be things that you can then just go back and fix, right? Say, you know, oh, the Glock doesn't have an actual safety; it has a trigger safety. What's one that came up lately? And so in this chapter, when you mention you know, the safeties, you need to be watching, make sure that you're using a trigger safety for a Glock instead of a switch safety. And so I go back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I go back, you know, I search for safety in that chapter. I go and make sure I described it right, and then I cross that thing off my list, delete it, and it's done. If you can make one change and then delete it and it's done, then it goes in the small level things for me. And that's how I approach a draft. And I will get to more stuff on discovery writing in a minute.
I was just wondering, so I know you said you have like a 6-month period between 3.0 and 4.0.
Yes.
Does that mean you don't wait for your whole book to go through your writing group?
No, I just submit larger chunks to the writing group if I'm on a deadline. If I'm not, I can wait. And it depends. Way of Kings, the writing group was doing 20,000 word chunks. Yep. And then for the next year, plus, I've been doing 2,000 word chunks to make up for it. And so we're almost through another book that way, and that one we've been doing 2,000 word chunks on like short stories and things like that. So yeah, you guys can afford to take longer than the 6 month, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll be going through, and my 6 months is up, I've done half the book in revision, I'll actually go do my 4.0. In fact, this happens very frequently, and I'll warn readers, I'll do the 4 and the 5, I'll warn my alpha readers. By the way, from this point on, we're in 5.0 instead of 3.0, which means that these fundamental things have been changed. You're going to notice some shifts. You'll just have to deal with it, and they do. And that happens very frequently. All right. Yes?
What's like your workflow throughout the entire year, for instance? Like, first I work on this book, just writing it, then I'll switch over to revising another book, or how does it?
That's what happens. Just as things...
Between writing and revising, like that's it?
Yeah, bouncing between writing and revising. That's about it. One project at a time. Also planning. That's the 3 stages. You know, pre-writing, writing, revising. I'm swapping between them at various points.
So like what ratios would you say?
It depends. Whatever I have to work on. I mean, I've said how much time I generally spend revising, but there are years when, you know, it's all revisions because I've written several books the year before, and then I spend 8 months doing revisions on those books. There are years where I spend a lot of time writing and don't do as many revisions. It just depends on, you know, you're looking for too much structure. I'm a writer. I don't do this for structure. I don't have a desk, you guys understand. Desks are for people who, you know, add numbers or things. I have a couch and a laptop. If I have to work at a desk, then something is wrong. If I have to know, you know, it's almost even if I have to get up at a certain time, something's wrong in my life. I once spoke to David Drake, and David Drake, you know, this is going to be different from different people, but David Drake, he intentionally bought, he's a science fiction fantasy author, fairly popular one. He bought a big, huge plot of land. I'm thinking something like, I mean, amazingly, like 200 acres or something, out in the middle of nowhere. And he went and he moved there with his family, and he does his thing, and he told me, he said, I never take any sort of appointment or any sort of job or anything that requires me to arrive at a certain time. That is my life. If you want to work with me, there is no certain time. It has to be between, you know, on this day, in these certain number of hours. If you can get there, great. If you can't, we'll have a backup plan. Then he says yes. And if it's raining, he rides a motorcycle only. If it's raining, he doesn't leave. He calls him and says, sorry, I'm not coming. And he says that's the life he leads as a writer, to be very free and relaxed. Other writers don't work that way. Eric Flint often talks about how much of a binge writer he is, where he gets, almost all of his writing done in a given year during a couple of 2-month periods. And all the rest of the time, he's just doing all the other stuff that comes with writing, doing appearances, doing revisions, things like that. But he sets aside those 2 months and he says, I'm not going to do anything. There's nothing. You can't, because those 2 months, I'm writing only, and I don't exist in this world. And he won't. He will not, and he schedules that out so that he knows ahead of time, these 2 months, you won't be able to talk to me. You won't be able to call me because I'm working. Writers go take writers' retreats and things like that to do this. I mean, it's a weird job. And there are a lot of quirky individuals who get to set their own schedules, and so guess what happens? But I do want to talk about other writers' processes so that you understand. This is my process. It's what I've worked out over years that works well for me. The other style of process is really the more instinctive process used by a lot of discovery writers. Like my friend Kaylin, who's recently sold a few books to Tor. She writes a book, and she will stop and do edits mid-book quite frequently. If she thinks, oh, this isn't working out like I want, I'll go and experiment with it this way, or I'll go and experiment with this way. She will frequently finish a book. Bye-bye. She will frequently finish a book and then set it aside and take a 2 or 3 year gap. And then she'll come back and start it from page 1 again, after she did all that time to kind of work on it in her head about how she wants to fix it. And she doesn't approach it goal-based like this. She approaches it very instinctively. I write it, I see how it's feeling. If it's not right, I will put it away and I'll stop writing it and I'll write on something else. I don't put things away. She'll put it away, and Ray Bradbury says this. He says he has a drawer of hundreds of unfinished stories that he stopped partway through because it wasn't right yet. And he'll come back to that story every day. He'll pick out a few stories and type at them and work on them and then file them away again and things like this. That works very well for him. It's going to be your own thing, figuring it out. And the problem with this is, I've mentioned before, I realized about a year or two ago that all the best writers I knew were actually better revisers than they were writers. That goes for Dan, that goes for Kaylin, that goes for Eric, that goes for Jancy. All of my friends who are really good writers are all actually better revisers than they are writers. They don't have very clean first drafts. I have fairly clean first drafts, but I'm the only architect among the group, and that's kind of our first drafts. You can go read Warbreaker. You can see what I mean by a fairly clean first draft. Yes, there are problems, but it still reads like a book. For me, it's getting that extra 20% to make it awesome. Whereas for someone like Dan, he writes it and it needs 60%, but he doesn't do all the planning ahead of time. He writes it out. And then he's like, wow, needs huge fundamental changes. That's fun. And then he goes and does these huge fundamental changes. I hate that, but he likes this stage. So, all right, there's my thing on revision. I wish I could give you more. It comes down to knowing your own process and knowing what you like. When things are working for you, what does that mean? When you get done with a day's worth of writing, and you feel just, that was awesome. What about it was awesome? What about it worked? When you read some scenes in your writing, you're like, wow, that's way better than I remember it being. What about it is way better? Like, why? And that's what you're shooting to learn how to do more and more.
I had a family tragedy earlier this year, and I found it severely impacted my ability to write.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. You probably need to ask a different writer because I personally am not an emotional person. It's a weird thing that I have. I have kind of the opposite of whatever it is that causes other people to have wild emotional variance. My wife, when we were first dating, was like, I'm dating data. And it really is. Some people have, I have whatever the opposite of bipolar is, where, people are like, other people are like this, in their emotional spectrum, and I'm like this. I basically feel the same every day. I don't have bad, depressed days. I don't feel depressed. There are days I don't feel like working as much as others. Those are usually because I have a head cold or I have allergies or something. But I've never been depressed. It just doesn't happen to me. I've never been so excited that I, scream or things like that. That doesn't happen to me either. If people's emotional states are, a 0 is depths of depression and 100 is like the huge bastion of excitement, I'm at a 70 always. And that's who I am. And so how do you write through that? You need to talk to other people. The other thing is I haven't had huge tragedies in my life yet. I'm sure they will come. But huge tragedy for me is my editor doesn't like the book. That's as bad as things get. And so, I've had grandmothers pass away, but in her 90s. So come back to me, in 20 years when I've lost my parents, and we'll see. Otherwise, go talk to other writers and see what they do. I don't really know if I have a suggestion for that. The same way that I write the fact that allomancy exists, or write being a 16-year-old girl when I've never been one. Being a writer is about observation, about psychology, and I can understand it, I feel, not having felt it myself, because I can extrapolate, what it would be to feel like I do and extrapolate it to other heights. I can write, hopefully, an atheist who feels like an atheist, though I'm not. And that's a skill of a writer. But at the same time, if you read something like Jancy writes, I think that she does it better because she's been there, and I haven't. So this is a skill of a writer, I guess. But yeah, that's just how I am. I've met others who are like this. I think it's more of a guy thing because we don't have quite as many hormones changing what's going on in our mix month by month, but my mom is actually a little bit more this way as well. So I don't know. I'm sure I'm not unique. I'm sure there are plenty. I'm sure there are others in this room that are like, yeah, that's kind of how I am too. But yeah, interviewing people helps a lot. Interviewing people with certain different emotional states. All right, other questions? Yeah. It's going to depend on your personal psychology. Carrots work really well for me, meaning I've got to get this done. I know I've got to get it done. If I work on this for this much time and I get this much done, then I'll go and buy myself a copy of Skyrim and I'll start playing. Something like that. Carrots actually are pretty good for me. And so it depends. I mean, early in my career, it was less carrots and more the stick, meaning if I don't get this done, I'm going to end up having to do a real job. And I've described it before that jokingly I saw like some phantom cubicle chasing me through the streets, and it's like, I got to stay ahead of the cubicle. I was passionate about writing. I still am. I love writing. I love those moments when I'm in the book doing particularly the first draft and everything's coming together. And I can't have those moments, couldn't have those moments professionally unless I did this part. And I didn't for many years. And that's part of what took me 13 books to get published, is I didn't start doing this until later in my career. So you just have to figure out how you motivate yourself to do anything you don't like. How do you motivate yourself to do your home teaching or whatever it is? Some people really like home teaching. I actually enjoy home teaching. But whatever it is that you don't like doing, how how do you motivate yourself to do it? Doing revisions is my least favorite thing in the entire world. There's nothing, I mean, I would much rather be doing anything else that reasonably I could be doing. I'm sure I wouldn't like being tortured in North Korean prison more, but you know, anything else in my life I would rather be doing than that. But it's part of the job. And as bad parts of a job go, it's not so bad at all, because, you know, working for someone else, that would be even worse. Letting someone else, you know, the thing about writing, on one of the intangible benefits, so to speak, one of the things that we don't talk about a lot that I just absolutely love is that my success is directly tied to how good a job I do. The only one determining my future is me. I'm not going to work really hard on a project coding, you know, and doing the best job of coding ever, and then have the marketing team flub up so much that the product doesn't get released and I lose my job. Conversely, I'm not going to, you know, do that and do this wonderful job and then have the project leader be praised and get a raise. If I do a poor job with my writing, I will not make money because people won't buy my books. If I do a good job with writing, people will buy my books, and I will continue to be able to do it. And that's a really liberating feeling. It's not even a feeling you can have at the beginning of your career, because before you become a name in the field, lots of things can mess up, you know, that aren't your fault. But once you hit my level, only I can mess up. I'm not going to magically stop selling because they put a bad cover on my books. Whereas early on, that could be something that could mess up your career a little bit. I'm not going to, you know, those things aren't a consideration anymore. I have enough of a presence, and so that's really awesome. You know, my bonuses, so to speak, there are no bonuses. It is every person who buys a book, I get a cut of it, and so if lots of people are buying them, I make money. And you know, that's not the primary reason to be a writer, but boy, it's nice. Oh, we'll go to you next. You're kind of hiding back there. She already had one, so we'll do her, and then we'll come over here.
Sure. Well, with having a spouse as a reader,
yes.
Was your wife a reader before?
My wife was an English teacher, so yeah.
That's
Yeah. And you know what? My wife, she just does this instinctively. She gives raw comments. She gives some feedback, but she mostly just rah-rahs. And I think that's a good place for a spouse to be. We've never talked about the fact that that's what she does, but she just naturally started doing that. I don't think you want your spouse to be the one usually giving you the really harsh feedback and criticism. So I'm glad that that's how she approaches it.
Okay, so this might be more a question for you, and it might be silly, but like we talk a lot about like, oh, your editor might not like this, or the writing group might not like this, but do you ever worry like the opposite, like people, like influencing people? Because like sometimes people really like
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you ever worry,
it's a little weird.
You write about someone who's depressed or having a depressing time or questioning their religion or something like that, and like, do you ever worry about like affecting people?
In that way, not as much. Because I feel that I try to write real characters, like people, realistic, you know, that when you look at them, there's a depth to them. They are a person, and they may be struggling with something like that, but I don't think that would have any more influence on someone than a friend doing it. And this is just sort of the thing that we deal with in life. There are certain other things that I wonder about. You know, one of which is at what point do we cross the line into glorifying violence? That's a problem, I think, for all action-oriented storytelling, and that's a tough one. And you know, our society is too infatuated with violence, I feel. Other ones, you know, there are people who really get into books, and boy, I appreciate them, and I love that they do that. And at the same time, I think, you know, that William Shatner skit where he's like, it's only, you know, have you guys seen this thing from Saturday Night Live where he gets up and people are asking questions, and finally, after a few minutes, he says, "Get a life, people." And I wouldn't say that, but what he's getting at is, it is just a story. And at the end of the day, I hope that reading my books is not becoming so fascinating to people that they're letting other things lapse in their lives. We are too entertainment-focused a society as well. And good books, I believe, I'm a little bit biased, have a good place in any person's healthy entertainment regimen. But, you know, if you're reading books 8 hours a day, I'm worried. Unless, you know, you're a closet, you know, you're a 14-year-old bookworm, then yeah, you're probably all right because, you know, but, you know, at the same time, you're pointing at each other. At the same time, you know, there are lots of good things that people should be doing, and reading books is actually pretty low on that list. And so I don't want to be feeding addictions to the point that it's distracting from other important things in people's lives. So those are things I think about.
What should our target word count be for chapters? Because I'm realizing as I go back and revise that I have 10 or 12,000 word chapters. I don't know if that's okay.
10 or 12,000 is on the long end. You're probably okay, but it is on the long end. Your target length for a chapter should be dependent on what you're trying to achieve for the chapter. And if it has a good arc, beginning, middle, and end, then that's what you should be writing for. There is no set chapter length. There are a lot of people who will write, you know, Dan Brown writes 3-page chapters or 2-page chapters. Terry Pratchett does not put chapters in most of his books. They are one single long chapter with viewpoint breaks. And Robert Jordan liked 5,000 and 6,000 word chapters that were big and meaty. 5,000 and 6,000 is considered pretty big and meaty. So 10, 12,000 is really big, but if it's got a bit beginning, middle, and end, you know, yeah.
Okay, and going off of that, the only thing I can think right now is the Hunger Games, where every chapter ends on like some immensely cliffhanging thing.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
It's like a strategy, but seems really annoying. So how do you know, because me, I just write the storyline in general, so how do you know where to divide it up into chapter breaks?
You should start practicing as you write, I would suggest, building beginning, middle, end to a scene and getting a sense for this is an end of a scene and letting a chapter break be there, or at least a scene break. What the Hunger Games is doing is what in the industry we call thriller plotting. Thriller plotting is, in thrillers, they want to use their chapters as a way to yank you through the story. And they will do this by ending every chapter with some sort of hook. A really powerful one, and then they try to begin the next chapter with a powerful hook as well. And so this comes down to what type of chapter writing you want to do. We've talked about this a little bit, but what they are doing is they're usually doing very short chapters, and the chapters kind of do introduce a problem, get there, and then often break right here where the first thing goes wrong. Normally, where your first try fail cycle, they try and it goes wrong, or they open the door that they've been trying to get to, and behind the door is, you know, it's the end of Lost Season 1, right? The light turns on. John has been digging at this thing for a while, and he can't get it open, and he like bonks it, and boom, a light goes on. It ends with a question. If you want to be better at this, watch shows that use this type of plotting. Lost is a good one. Or read Hunger Games is good. Most thrillers will do this. They want short bursts that make you turn the page, and then they'll actually denouement a little bit in the chapter. They'll have, you know, a little bit of action actually, and then they'll denouement, and then they'll ask another question, and they'll cut like this, so that you're never stopping it at the end of a denouement. Because the idea being, if you stop at the end of a denouement, then you have a little bit of a sigh of relief, and you can put the book down. And so their philosophy is that, you know, if you're doing this, that you're always cutting right here to keep them reading the book. I don't do that. I do it occasionally, you'll notice, but when I do it, if you read my books, watch for times I do this. Usually what I'm actually doing is I'm chopping in half a 2-chapter sequence. That's really one chapter that's a given scene. And I feel that I'm going to use a little bit of this trick right here to pull you through that little sequence. But usually what I'm doing is I'm having longer, my chapters are usually 3,000 to 4,000 words. And what I'm doing is we're having a beginning, middle, and end, and then I cut. Sometimes I'll cut right there. I'll have a little question or things like this, and then beginning, middle, end, and then I cut. And this is because instead of thriller pacing, I'm trying to do epic pacing, which is you get a big meaty chunk that pulls you into the world and gives you this fulfilling sense of world building, and it's long and it's kind of thick, and by the end we let you take a break and relax and put the book down if you want to. Very different styles of storytelling. I usually will let you put the book down. I build into my book's breakpoints, and that's partially because it works really well to read Hunger Games in 1 or 2 sittings. Way of Kings does not work in 1 or 2 sittings. And so I have the danger of overloading people, whereas where Hunger Games doesn't have that as much of a danger. So is it on this topic? Yeah.
Concerning what I find that I do more of like a viewpoint pacing, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like it's a chunk of viewpoint, and it might be 3 chapters,
Uh-huh.
and kind of
Yeah.
viewpoint changes and it's
Yeah.
something completely
Yep.
different. Is that?
Yeah, Robert Jordan did that in a lot of his books too. And almost when you're doing that, what I've seen work best is what you're trying to do is you're almost like you're telling a short story in the world, and you want to make sure those 3 chapters have their own kind of little mini 3-act format or something, where it's like chapter 1, we're introducing the problem, we're struggling with it, we're working on some things. Chapter 2, we tried something and it's not working at all. What do we do now? Chapter 3, okay, we've worked through it, we've pulled it out, end of viewpoint, jump. Some people actually have them get to the end and then leave the cliffhanger and then jump to another group of characters. I really, that can be bothersome, but I've used it before too. So these are all tools to use at different points and different times. So how do you do that? I mean, it is a good tool to learn how to use, but the thing to be aware of thriller plotting is it gets tedious. You feel like you can't put the book down, but at the same time that makes you frustrated with it, because if the writer does it, it feels like they're doing dirty tricks. The example of this is, they build up, Dan Brown does this in the Da Vinci Code. He builds up this, one of the characters, Sophie, saw some terrible thing. Learn she opened the door and saw some terrible thing on the other side. And like a good dozen times through the chapter, it's like, and then she remembered that day when she opened the door and saw, and then like the chapter ends, and then she gets interrupted in her thing in the next chapter and doesn't tell you because something big happens. Or, she opened the door and then the guy next to her got shot and she's jumped back into this time, or she's telling someone, about this experience and then he gets shot or something. And it's like you almost get the answer, and every time you almost get the answer, it builds up how cool that answer has to be. And so it leads to the potential of ultimate, when you get the answer, it's problematic because the answer is not as cool as it's been built up to be. That's one of the problems with thriller plotting. People notice this a lot about Lost, that the answers were nowhere near as cool as the questions were. And J.J. Abrams is really good at this. And so what you'll see J.J. doing, particularly in that first season of Lost, is whenever he gives an answer, he gives a cooler question alongside it. So when you have a mixed feeling of, well, that answer wasn't that cool, but that question is awesome, so obviously it's going to have the real answer. And so I will keep following this question. So they just keep piling the questions on top of each other, but it gets it gets frustrating and annoying. And it's why it works really well in a short book and really poorly in a long book. But it's something you can study. It's certainly a tool that you can use. I think J.J. used it much better than Dan Brown did. Dan Brown, I got tired of it very quickly. If that book had been a third of the length that it was, I feel that I would have enjoyed it much more than I did, because having every chapter end with someone getting shot or an explosion or some, personally, this is just a hobby horse, but if you are going to end a chapter with they like to end a chapter with, and they open the door and that's one way to make a reader have a question to keep reading. I would rather have them open the door, find something so awesome behind that door, that it changes your view on the book, and it's great, and you've got your answer. And the reason you keep reading is you want to find out the ramifications of that, not you want to keep finding out what's behind the door. But that's harder. It's much easier to do it the other way. And I will say that doing it the way that what's behind the door is so awesome is actually really tough. And I'm not sure that I'm even that great at it in all instances. So. All right.
I just know, previous lecture we were talking about names and names for people and places.
Yes.
They don't really worry about it. So I know it doesn't really matter, but
right.
do you have some sort of process for making up names?
I thought I went over this. I use usually linguistic cues. I've taken some linguistics courses, and so I will build the base linguistics of a region. For instance, I'll say, okay, I want to have lots of S sounds for what those names give. An S can be almost a sinister thing, but it's very smooth and whatnot. Or I want to use lots of glottal stops and whatnot, which to us, usually means very kind of more of a blunt, straightforward culture because of the way it is in our world. And you'll notice the way we interact with English affects the way we view language. For instance, one thing to look at is English has two huge influences, Latinate and Germanic. And the Germanic sounds tend to be, and the Germanic words tend to be very more simple base words for us. For whatever reason, I'm sure the linguist can dig deep into this. And then we'll usually have a Latinate version that is more ornate and flowery. And this might be because of the whole Normans thing where they came in and they were the upper class. And so the Latinate language, the French-based language, was what the upper crust used. And so they had all their words for it. And then the Germanic influence was of the people. Is that what you were going to say? It's probably that from back in the 1300s. But for whatever reason, you will have the Germanic way of saying something be give up, and then the French, the Latinate way being to retreat. And one has a certain sense to us, and one doesn't. A lot of our words, and I'll get some of these wrong, but a lot of our Germanic words are things like food and work and all of these words. There's a good chance if it's a short word that means something very concrete, it's Germanic in our language, and if it's a concept, it's usually Latinate. And so you can build on that with the sounds you use in order to build your cultures. That's one of the things. And so linguistic tropes. Usually I like to pick either a region of our world that I'm basing off of, and it depends on how translucent I want to be. For instance, in Mistborn, I intentionally built an Earth analog, meaning I wanted the culture and the technology to have happened in basically Earth-style ways. And so the culture is going to feel very familiar because it's Luthadel is based on 1800s Paris. And you have the languages, therefore, the area where Ellen's from is just basically using German. I went and I took German words and I looked for morphemes in them that sounded cool to me, and I built names out of them. Because of that, a lot of the names for people from that region are actually words in German. Stroff, Ellen's father, is a German word. So is Elend, I found out later on. Whereas, the central dominance is French, and so you have names like Vin and de Meaux and Renault and Kelsier and things like this. And so that's, and then there's Spanish out the other way. And that was just because it was an Earth analog. For Way of Kings, I was not using an Earth analog for most of my cultures. And so instead, I was building interesting linguistic concepts. And so I built a lot of the names to be palindromes because of, symmetry being holy. In Warbreaker, I did this with something different. I just felt like I liked the idea of repeated consonant sounds. It was interesting. It's a fun linguistic thing. And so you end up with Sesebron and Vivina and Caesarina and things like that as the names where they use the repeated vowel consonant sounds. Just so there's something tying them all together. I'll usually write out a list of forbidden sounds. They just don't have in that language, and maybe a couple of sounds we don't have in our language that they use. And I'll go from there. But using earth analogs, I do it a lot because it allows us to reference what's, some of the built-in things from our world. So one way to do this easily is to get a big atlas and look for a lot of words and names. Another one is baby names from those countries and things like that. So.
What about dialects, like regional dialects? You do a really good job of that, I've noticed.
It really just depends. I try to keep them subtle. I try to keep them simple. For instance, the Terrace dialect in Misc is really only 3 or 4 little rules for myself. In their original language, they had a word that meant I think, to soften. We do this a lot. We don't have them as much in English, except Canadian English uses a, and things like this. But a lot of languages have it. Spanish has one, doesn't it? What's that?
Verdad?
Maybe, yeah. There you go, verdad. So the Terrace people will say at the end, they'll often reverse that structure and just say, I think. Instead of, I think that there's, they'll say, it is this and this and this, I think. And that's one thing that they do. I built them to have compound sentences more often than simple sentences. And this is to kind of reflect their nature as a lot of scholars and things like this. And just a couple of little linguistic rules like that to help me along and to not go overboard. I think dialect's too easy to go overboard on. In Elantris, it was just a couple of words from the language that I threw in, Sule, and Kolo, and a couple of these things to just add some flavor to it. So again, I suggest being more subtle, and there are a few tricks that authors use a little too often, I feel. They still can work just fine, but the no contractions thing, a lot of authors you'll see, and a lot of newer writers are like, well, I'll make them use no contractions to be their thing. And that's okay, but I would rather you say no contractions plus, we have a very formal way of speaking, so we always address someone by their name. Or their full name, which was something Robert Jordan did. The Aiel always addressed people by their full name. Very rarely do they not use the full name because that's one of the things he wanted for that culture. And something like that is actually more distinctive. It's also a little more invisible, and yet at the same time gives a great sense for the language. And so if you want someone to be smart, the other one that people use too often is using big words. Smart people don't actually use big words all that often. This is a false sort of sense that we've gotten from media that the smart one is using all these big words. It doesn't happen. Go listen to smart people, and that's not what they do. Smart people tend to be much better at making arguments. They tend to be much more self-assured, and they tend to use complex compound sentences and arrange their sentences like I just did, where it's organized very thoughtfully. People who are not educated are not going to organize their thoughts thoughtfully in a structure. They're going to kind of be more all over the place. You can also talk about instinct versus learning and how people talk. Whether they're talking about their gut or whether they're referencing something they know because they know somebody who talked about this once and things like that. That is how intelligent people talk. Listen to how your professors talk. Listen to how your friends talk, because we are all educated. And that's what we're really talking about, is someone who's educated. The other thing that really intelligent people do, if they're hyper intelligent in our society, if you talk to them, pop culture references are just, the way they talk is back and forth really fast, referencing obscure things. They don't use big words. They reference an episode of The Simpsons that they know another hyper-intelligent person will know and laugh at, and everyone else will be like, what? Or they'll make a really, really witty pun that'll make them smile. This is what it was like hanging out with Ken Jennings, my roommate. You guys know that, right? Yeah, my roommate. When I lived with Ken and his brother Nathan and our pal Earl, those three were all on College Bowl together. Well, Ken and Earl were, and I don't think Nathan was with them, but they're all trivia buffs. They're all hyper intelligent, and a conversation between the three of them is not full of big words. Instead, it's full of the right words. It's full of lots of quick back and forth, and it's full. It's over your head because you don't know what they're referencing half the time. So that's what how hyper-intelligent people get. So anyway, those are just a couple of mistakes people make. Instead of having them, use words like miasmic and these big long sentences with these. You've seen it. They do it. They do it in kids' cartoons all the time. Well, that's the smart one because he just used a word I don't know. So.